And I've received the feedback personally as a manager that I'm almost too calm. Doesn't mean that I'm slow, but I just want to gather the facts. Okay, let's realize what the situation is all about. Let's get a structure in place. Let's start working with it. And I've learned from a few colleagues back in the days that I just need to make sure that I signal, that I acknowledge that we have a crisis. So I need to say, okay, guys, we have a crisis situation. I'm aware of that. We're going to handle that now, and we're going to do it in this structured and calm way.
Welcome to Morning Brew for Marketing Executives, the podcast where senior B2B marketing leaders from globally recognized brands in complex industries share their stories and experiences. Here we dive into the world of marketing leadership and hear more about what it's like to be a marketing leader. Today, we're excited to welcome Viktor Wallström, the Senior Vice President and Head of Group Communication and Sustainability at Saab. With an impressive career, Viktor has established himself as a thought leader in crisis management and communication within the defense and security sector. Join us to learn more about crisis communication and management tips for leaders. Viktor shares his advice on getting ready for, handling, and bouncing back from a crisis. This episode is hosted by Yanni Hovila, the Managing Director of Maven First, who has over a decade of experience working with marketing professionals in a complex sales environment. Let's get started.
Hello, Viktor. How are you today?
Hi, Johnny. I'm good, thank you.
Great to hear. Great to hear. And first of all, thank you for joining our podcast. And today's topic, crisis communication. You have been in the forefront around crisis communication, different organizations now in Saab. And can you share just your first thoughts why crisis communication is important and how your experiences have shaped your views around crisis communications in your career?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me on this podcast. I'm really looking forward to this chat. Yeah, I guess it's something you learn by experience when it comes to crisis management and crisis communication. Also, different organizations do it in different ways. But I think there are a few key things that you really need to get right in order to be prepared to handle a crisis when it pops up. And I think it's a lot about, having structure, the right people, and then trying to assume ownership of the situation. Easier said than done, definitely. But I think those are the three main things that you need to keep in mind when handling a crisis situation.
Just to kind of looking back, let's say a couple of years, and as you stated, the importance of taking ownership from a stakeholder standpoint, has the importance of crisis communication increased in the past 5 years with all the pandemics, cyber threats and everything? Or has that always been an important part of the management team's agenda from your point of view?
Well, once again, very much dependent on the organization. And if you look at a telco, for example, where I worked for a number of years prior to joining Saab, telco networks, they go down regularly for different reasons. Sometimes it's, it's a technical fault on your end. Sometimes it's someone else's fault. Sometimes it's a ice storm, whatever it may be. That happens. And every time that happens, someone is affected in a negative way. And I mean, given the society setup and how dependent we are on digital solutions and services, that kind of role is exposed to a lot of crisis communication. But as you correctly point out, I think COVID pandemic and everything shed some light on the structure for corporates in general. So I guess, there's a higher awareness right now. But I think certain companies, they've had that in place for a number of years. Yeah. A lot depending on what kind of operations you're running, I guess.
Yeah, and that's a good point. That for some it has been a norm for many years, but just the structure and the nature of business. I think the telecom or of course as a consumer, I know that all the messages that come from the electricity company when there's a storm and everything. So it's actually a norm, but from some companies it's maybe a little bit not that frequent, hopefully, at least.
No, exactly. But I think, as you point out, COVID it struck all companies in some way or form in a very different way than what we were used to. I mean, we've had pandemics historically as well, but it was quite a long time ago. So I think many corporates woke up to that new kind of crisis, and how do we handle this from a internal communications perspective, from a very practical workplace perspective. Do we bring people in? Do we tell them to stay at home? And then, of course, economic consequences as well, and a changing sort of market world order, and that has, of course, continued as well with the war in Ukraine and everything. So, yeah, it was a new kind of experience for a lot of us in the corporate world.
Just from your responsibility and leading communication, of course, sustainability is a big part of that. What drives you? What's the why behind why you wake up every morning and go to the Saab office, Viktor?
Well, for me, Saab is really it's in a very interesting position because it's very complex, both from a product perspective. The products are very complex in themselves. I mean, a Gripen is not easy to build, neither a Gripen or a submarine or anything in between. But not only that, I mean, it's also part of the defense debate. It's part of the Swedish society from a workplace perspective and employer perspective. It's part of the Swedish international politics, it's security policy, and not only in Sweden, actually. It's, I mean, in a global context. And I think that mixture somehow makes it super interesting to run both communications and sustainability and marketing as well. So it really, it's the complexity and trying to, I guess, in a sense, explain that to people and navigating in that world. That's what really drives my motivation. And then always having a team, making sure they feel engaged, happy, that we enjoy going to work. That's also something that really motivates me. But I think communications, marketing, and sustainability is really in the spotlight right now for a company like Saab, and it's a privilege to have Saab as a workplace.
Definitely, and I will not ask how you market JAS Gripens to the potential buyers, because maybe we save that as we are now on the crisis communication team. Maybe we change that for a future episode, because probably lead generation and LinkedIn ads are not the best thing to do. I'm not sure. Maybe it is.
Well, I mean, that's an increased part of what we're doing.
Yeah.
It hasn't been historically, but now definitely it's become part of marketing our products as well.
Yeah, definitely.
But let's save that for the next episode, I guess.
Yeah, we kind of cliffhanger for the listeners, like how you build a marketing plan for fighter jets. Maybe that's
exactly. Or submarines.
Yeah, or submarines. Yeah, that's a good point. Just before jumping to the crisis communications, what's on your desk right now?
Well, loads to be honest. We have a super busy press team. Our CEO did around 130 interviews with high level media last year, and that has continued in the beginning of this year. We have a lot of trade shows where we're active, so a lot of branding, spatial branding, those kind of questions. We've just launched new platforms for our internal comms as well. We have a few marketing campaigns running, and also right now we're tracking the progress half a year in of 2025 when it comes to sustainability. So making sure that we're tracking, towards our strategy, and also looking already actually at, how do we update the strategy for 2026. So a lot of things on my plate, a lot of exciting things, and a very enthusiastic team that is working with all these kind of questions. So
So
we got
not the boring day in sight.
No, we'll keep busy.
That's good to hear. And not any crisis at your plate at least now.
Touch wood, nothing right now at least. So that's good.
All right. If we jump to the crisis communication, I think just for our listener, Maybe some have that in their job description somewhere, that part of crisis communication, or maybe that's accountability for them. Maybe some they are part of the team handling some part of that. But just kind of from your point of view, how would you define the goals and crisis communication in general for the listener?
Well, I guess I'm sure there are loads of great definitions out there. So, but for me, I mean, it's the strategic management of information communication when there's an unexpected happening, basically, which can damage your business, your operation somehow, or your reputation.
Mhm.
So, I guess that's the general definition. But I'm sure people could have a more better definition of it, but something along those lines, I would guess.
We always want to manage somehow the risk for some incident to affect our business. So there's always that kind of negative side if we don't do anything. Am I right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's really key. Trying to assume, as I mentioned earlier, trying to assume an ownership of the situation is really what you want to achieve always when it comes to crisis communication. And it's not really about, I think someone wise said that, but it's not about how you handle the crisis. It's about how you communicate how you're handling the crisis. That will essentially determine if you end up in a good situation afterwards or in a worse situation. So it's really about doing the right things, but maybe first and foremost communicate that you're doing the right things,
Mm.
because you're not managing your communication, your crisis communication, you will still fail even if you're doing the right things, but you're not getting that out there. Then you'll still fail from a sort of perception perspective.
I'm not deep in the crisis communication world, but just kind of that it's not enough you handle the situation or any incident well, but if you forget to communicate that well, then kind of the
Yeah.
risk is still there. So that's a good one.
Exactly. But then, of course, on the other on the other side, if you're doing the wrong things, you can't save that with the right communication either. So you need to do the right things, but then you need to communicate that you're doing the right
Yeah,
things.
definitely.
And also, you can really buy quite some time in the beginning of a crisis if you're proactive. You're out there saying, "This is what we know currently. This is what we're doing about it." But to be honest, we don't have all the information yet. We're trying hard to get all the information and understand the situation better. That will give you more time than if you just go out and say no comment. We don't know what is happening, basically.
It wasn't me.
Um, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like my children, that's what the first thing they say. It wasn't me.
Yeah. But just when I'm just thinking like the difference of let's say strategic communication and all, like how we want to communicate or how we want to shape our positioning and the marketing, that's something you can plan ahead of time. That's something you then plan and then you start executing. But the nature of crisis communication, that it can be the pandemic, it can be the vessel cut some line, cables
Yeah.
off, it can be anything. So just from the preparing and planning side, how can you prepare for something that's unexpected by nature and can be anything?
Yeah. And that's the difficult thing with crisis communication, but also from my perspective, it's part of the charm that you don't know what's going to happen. But what you can do is obviously plan for a number of scenarios. The only thing you know is that the crisis, when it comes, most likely won't be like any of the exact scenarios that you planned out. But the way of working, the team structure, the way information should flow within the company in that kind of scenario, and the way you should think, always think about people first, for example, that is common for quite a few crises. So that's how you should practice about it, and that's how you should address the unknown as well. That plan for as much as you can, and then just be aware that probably it won't be exactly like you planned it, but you will have learned a lot of lessons from just doing the scenario planning, thinking about how would we handle this situation as a team, what would go wrong, what could go better, and then you'll be more prepared, at least for when something unexpected happens, than if you didn't do any planning at all.
So preparing for multiple scenarios, have the plan ready, practicing that plan. Even after that, do you see any typical blind spots, or what has maybe not so specifically? Let's not share those blind spots, but just the kind of typical blind spots that might occur when you plan this crisis communication process.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So I think for a lot of corporates, and I used to be a consultant within the communications world as well. So I've seen a lot of different structures and companies from that perspective. But I think a lot of companies actually think that they need to elevate the crisis management to a higher level. So saying that, it's always the management team, for example, that should handle a crisis when it comes. And that's definitely not the way to do it, if you ask me. You should be able to handle the crisis, or you should strive to handle the crisis as close as normal operations as possible. So making sure that you retain the experts that work with something on a day-to-day basis, but then you need to probably add a more higher up decision maker into that mix to make sure that you have the speed and you have a clear sort of decision maker in that context. So trying to increase speed, but keeping it as close to normal operations as possible. I think that's one blind spot. The second one, I would say, is not having a clear crisis management team structure. And that's something I've seen work very well in certain companies and not work at all because it has been non-existent in other companies. So having a few defined roles, crisis manager who's responsible for the crisis, in turn maybe reporting to the management team to make sure they are in the loop and that, if there are new added resources needed or something like that, that decision can be taken quickly. Also, always having a secretary to document everything, all decisions that are made, media requests that are coming in, whatever it may be. And then, of course, having a communications manager as well in that context to manage the communication, asking the right questions towards the experts that are part of that team as well. And then ideally, you have the experts in their ordinary roles, but of course, working on the crisis management.
Many of our listeners are marketing executives with the communication or without the communication part, depending on the structure. How you see the, let's say, if you have that structure that you have a communication separate and marketing separate, how can marketing executives support you in that team? Or do you see a role for, or something they need to understand as being part of the team, or when the team is working?
Well, I think depends on how you define marketing and communications. We have everything in my team, so I guess you could use that in different ways. But I think normally, if you have the normal setup, you won't market yourself out of a crisis. It's going to be handling media, handling internal comms, more of the classical communication specific tasks. But then when it comes to rebuilding the brand, if you've had a really deep crisis or something like that, of course the marketing is going to play a huge role as well in that. And you need to be mindful of everything that's going on. And sometimes there are great examples of companies who've had a blow to their reputation, doing a nice ad in the paper, asking for forgiveness or claiming something. I don't know what. There are great examples of that as well, but maybe that's not something you do in the first phases of that crisis. It's going to come later on, most likely, I would say.
And just kind of, I have a couple examples, not naming the companies, but when they are in crisis and they still have active marketing and they kind of contradict each other because of the crisis, and then you see an ad for most secure X or something, and they are actually battling. So kind of have a spel ögon on the marketing side then.
No, exactly. And I think that's a very good point. I mean, that you should always be very mindful if you're a telco, for example, and you're talking about how great your network is and you have a huge network outage or whatever, you don't want those ads running next to it. So then, you need to make sure that the marketing team is up to speed and they take away all the digital banners for that crisis. And then, maybe think about what should the message be following a deep crisis. Do we need to adapt something? Do we need to think differently? Or should we even increase that messaging that we've run, that our networks are the best? Maybe that's what we need to increase going forward to win back the reputation.
Staying on the planning and preparing side, and also from the team side and the team structure, how you prepare that team for that typically maybe even high pressure situation? Is there any particular ways you can prepare your team for that, or is that just through, as you mentioned, through practice and practice?
I think practice is definitely going to be a main component. Also realizing that some people enjoy those kind of situations more than others, and making sure that you have the right skill set in that team. So, if you don't like stressful situations, you react badly to it, or you just don't enjoy it, then maybe you shouldn't be part of the crisis team. So, finding the right people, finding the right skill sets, and then practice, that's really key. And then also, when practicing, you might realize things about yourself or your colleagues. How do they actually react in these kind of high pressure situations? And I've received the feedback personally as a manager that I'm almost too calm. Doesn't mean that I'm slow, but I just want to gather the facts. Okay, let's realize what the situation is all about. Let's get a structure in place. Let's start working with it. And I've learned from a few colleagues back in the days that I just need to make sure that I signal, that I acknowledge that we have a crisis. So I need to say, okay, guys, this is, we have a crisis situation. I'm aware of that. We're going to handle that now. And we're going to do it in this kind of structured and calm way. Because sometimes they thought that, okay, Viktor hasn't realized the magnitude of this, because he's still very, very calm about it. And I mean, you of course need to signal that, okay, guys, let's get working, and we need to work quickly and all of that. But at the same time, you shouldn't be stressed yourself as a leader in that kind of situation. And I think all members of a crisis management team have personal learnings to really think about and to try to develop. So having these kind of follow-up meetings after a crisis is finished, how did you feel about it? Was there something I should have done differently? Should we have handled it differently as a team? Are the roles correct? Doing a lot of lessons learned afterwards is also very valuable, I would say.
Just on the practicing side, we probably have the small scale practicing more through the process, and then the larger scale scenario plays, wargaming. How would you mix those together, or would you prefer both, or how you see how you can practice the scale of things?
Yeah, I think you need to practice on all different levels. So and that of course depending on the scenarios that you've thought out for your company. So that's the first thing I would do. What could actually happen to us as a company? What kind of risks do we see? Most companies have a risk register that they're working actively with. So start from that side, put scenarios in place, be creative, think about, okay, could something additional happen in this context? And then you, of course, practice on a more tactical level with your team. And then there will definitely be learnings. And not only, I mean, team structure wise, team members, but also the physical structure around crisis management. Where do we actually sit if this happens? How do we, if it continues for a long time, how do we make sure we have resilience over time? We need to have maybe 2 or 3 crisis managers that can replace each other, so someone can sleep while the others take over. What kind of equipment do we need? Do we need whiteboards? Do we need a certain screen? Do we need food? Where do we eat? All those kind of things you need to have an idea about. And I think practicing is the best way of getting those learnings without being in a in a live crisis scenario.
Yeah, that's how you say the more you sweat in training.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. And I have part of not through my job, but through my hobbies in couple, let's say, medium scale scenario planning, like with all actors in place and everything. I think those learnings are quite invaluable that you couldn't get anywhere else, but just kind of immersing yourself in the situation. How many times you would kind of have those big scenario plays? Is that twice a year? What's the frequent, just from your experience, or what's the frequent you think it should be?
I think that depends on how many live situations you have as well during a year. So if you have few live crisis situations, then you need to practice more. But I mean, doing one or two bigger exercises a year, I guess, would be a reasonable amount. Yeah, in the telco world, to be honest, you had a lot of live scenarios, a different scale and sometimes small scale. But we were really quick on assembling the crisis management team. We had the structure in place, we had the room in place, everything around that. So it was a well-oiled machinery, and we said that it's always better to just assemble the team and then say, okay, listen, this is resolved, before we even got started. So we just go back to normal operations again. So it depends. We didn't practice that much within telco. We had some huge exercises as well between all the telcos in Sweden, for example, which was of course valuable. But yeah, it depends on how many live scenarios you have. 1 or 2 times a year practicing would be reasonable, I think.
And I bet in the, like, let's use us as an example, as a consultancy, we don't have many live, knock on wood, live scenarios a year even, or even past 3 years. So probably then the need for practicing is more than if you have kind of different scale of live scenarios to do. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That.
But I think you can also learn, you can learn a lot from practicing in a crisis situation. You can learn a lot that is actually useful for everyday work as well. So there's no harm in practicing more often than less often.
Yeah, definitely. So if we now have prepared and planned and practiced, and now some incident happens and we are in crisis, what's the first steps that needs to happen?
I think the first step, of course, would be to get the right people in place, try to get a complete picture of the situation as possible, and then setting the structure in place as well. So deciding on who does what, who takes what role in the crisis management team, if you haven't defined that from the beginning, and then gather that team and assess the situation.
So assessing what happened, maybe why it happened, what's the effect, what's after
Yeah.
that. Now we have a
Well,
partial picture.
yeah, exactly. Now, once you have a partial picture, you of course need to take a strategic decision. How much information can we share? I think you should always try to share as much as possible. Of course, not confidential stuff, but as much as you can, as early as you can, and saying, most importantly, what are you doing about it? So if there are blanks in your information map, you say that, we're working to get more information and to understand this and that we already, or that we don't currently know, but we're doing everything we can to try to get hold of that information. So being proactive and being out there. Of course, you don't want to say something that might change to the opposite or something like that. So you need to have that strategic assessment of, is this information that we can share? Is there a risk that if we share it now, we'll have to do a drawback and say, oh, okay, no, that wasn't the case? Then you start appearing a bit messy and you lose trust. So better to go out saying, this is what we know by now, and this is what we're doing about it. We're going to get back to you as soon as we can.
You mentioned in the early stages that one kind of typical is that we push the accountability or have kind of the higher up CEO, chairman, or someone be part in the crisis. Just kind of from the first steps and getting back to that. why is that you want to have the lowest possible, in a sense you mentioned, or did I catch something wrong? Just the kind of that your thought process should we kind of have the CEO on stage for the crisis, or should we have the appropriate executive taking part? Just kind of your thought process.
Yeah, no, exactly. And one thing is about who gives the message, right? Who becomes the spokesperson, and that also there, I think trying to keep CEOs, board members, leadership team members away for as long as possible, or depending on the magnitude, of course. But let's say it's nothing that affects the leadership team or of that dignitude for or magnitude for the company. Then I think it should be the normal spokesperson that should deliver the messages, because sometimes you also need to be able to escalate. If it starts out small and then becomes super big, you're going to want the CEO to be there. But if you've already launched the CEO in that context for a super small thing, you don't get that escalation effect, and that has to do with responsibility, mandate, accountability as well. So you want to be able to land there if it's a huge thing for your company. But also, I mean, let's say we have a technical crisis, I don't know, IT, something around IT. You don't want to lift the decision making from the IT team to the management team all of a sudden, because most likely or hopefully the IT team is much better equipped to decide on what to do to resolve the actual technical situation, even though it's a crisis. I mean, they should be able to handle that. So that's what I mean with trying to retain it in the normal operations situation for as long as you can. But then, the IT team might say that, hey, we need to buy something for 100 million in order to resolve this. Then you want to have the executive decision-making progress. So then you don't want we need to bring this to a committee that will look into it and assess, is this the right tool? Are there other tools that we could procure to resolve the situation? Then you just want someone to say, okay, we need to resolve the situation ASAP. So here's 100 million to buy your thing to resolve the situation. All of these are, of course, hypothetical scenarios.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, my reasoning.
Yeah, definitely. So you want to have the room to escalate if needed, but not do that just because. But if you have the room, if you continue the IT example, we have some IT problem and it doesn't go away. Maybe the harm done is greater than first anticipated. We have room to escalate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Got it.
And also to ensure that you have the speed. So, escalate to get the speed. So we need to resolve this within 24 hours. Yeah, fine. Our ordinary processes might be 3 weeks, 2 weeks, a month to do these kind of decisions. Now we need to do it quickly because we have a crisis situation. Let's get it done. And that decision, of course, most likely will need to be taken by someone in a management team or a CEO or even a board member.
In crisis communication, we kind of have I think you mentioned in the description of what is crisis communication that you want to kind of shape the story, so to speak, or own the story. But just what in concrete actions, what it means if you own the story? Is that you need to be the first to come out? Is that it's or how would you describe how to get that you own the story?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you become a spokesperson quite early to be able to handle the external perception of what is actually happening, and also showing that we are here, we're working on it. I understand that this might be super cumbersome for the people who are affected. We're doing everything we can. I mean, that will give your reputation some buffer, I guess. The hit won't be as hard to your reputation straight away, rather than not saying anything. You're going to have the media, for example, building their own perception. They might get a customer to your operation or to your business to comment saying, this is terrible, we don't know what's happening, we have no information, it's the worst company in the world, whatever it may be. So trying to be proactive, trying to own the story, and instead, we don't have the information, but we're trying to get a hold of it. That's better than saying nothing or just being not being there to answer questions.
So continuing on the IT example, that we don't want to risk that some journalist finds one customer affecting because our IT system is down, and then they can have their perception in the media without the facts or all the facts, and it's
Yeah, exactly. And then, I mean, then you would only have the upset customer saying something which looks really bad.
Yeah.
And especially if you're not even showing up. So that's not really taking responsibility. And what you want is for a company to take responsibility. Things go wrong. People understand that things can go wrong. That's okay. But you want to have a company that cares and that actually does something about it.
Yeah.
So that's what you want to showcase in the beginning, I guess.
All right. Now we are in crisis. We handle that, and the storm is calmer. What we need to do after the storm? How you measure the success? Did we succeed or not?
Yeah, I think there's a number of tools, and depends very much on the situation. But I think it could be a poll. You do a poll. You do focus groups. You can do digital reputation tracking. There are loads of tools, and also, of course, assessing maybe the media exposure during this crisis. You can get that kind of report from several different companies helping out with sentiment. How bad was it? What was the reach for this crisis? How much negative publicity did you actually get? My experience is that from an internal perspective, it's quite often that you overestimate the impact of a crisis on your reputation. So, because it hurts you when you're part of a company and that the company is exposed in a bad way or negatively, it really hurts and it sticks with you. So then you feel like, okay, this was reported everywhere. Everyone is super upset. We have a really tough situation ahead of us. Sometimes it might have been bad, but people forget quickly. So just trying to get back on the horse and trying to rebuild your reputation, continuing what you did earlier is normally what you should try to do.
Yeah. So kind of the same, that if you're working in a company when there's crisis, if you are trying to buy a new car and you suddenly see those cars everywhere
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right.
Definitely.
Yeah, but then of course you need to obviously try to learn from the crisis and try to draw some conclusions around that. Both, what happened and did we do it right? How bad was the reputational impact? But then also tailoring your communication going forward, maybe to neutralize a bit of that negativity, or working in the right way. So you need to do that kind of assessment. But normally people will forget. You will get back up there. You will continue with your marketing campaigns, with your communication in the external context. And I think the worst thing you can do is just to hide and try to stay away from all kind of public appearance. So you need to get back out there and continue your work.
So any other parts on the rebuilding process? Now we have learned, we have done the post-mortem for both swim lanes, the communication part, and also the what happened, how fast we were to fix that. Any other things to take into consideration in the rebuilding process?
Well, of course, also assessing, team performance. How did everyone experience the crisis? What do we do going forward? Is anyone sort of, did anyone, maybe a spokesperson was really exposed during this crisis? How is that person feeling? Are they even personally a bit sort of damaged by it? Or so just being mindful of that and trying to draw as many lessons as you can. But then I think back on the horse and continue what you did before, and of course maybe adapting your messaging a little bit so you don't end up with something that connects to the crisis that you had straight away. That might be a risk, or maybe that's exactly what you want to do. Okay, we took a hit on our perception when it comes to this aspect of our company. So we need to do our marketing campaign to rebuild that specifically. But then you need to, of course, assess the timing and the sensitivity. Is it the right thing to do right now? Is it the right move? Might be, might not be, but that's the kind of strategic decisions that you need to take following a crisis.
See how fast we fix this network, or
Exactly.
so it
Yeah,
would be a
yeah,
probably
exactly.
good campaign, even or at least
Yeah,
a little bit different.
yeah.
In that sense. On the rebuilding phase, what's the easiest thing to forget from your point of view?
Well, I'm coming back to it, so sounding a bit like a parrot, but I think doing the proper lessons learned.
Yeah.
Because normally you're so excited about the crisis having moved over or past, you've survived. Finally, we're back in normal operations. Okay, good. Let's just continue working. So it's easy to forget that really deep lessons learned. Okay, was there anything we could have done differently? What would that be? Do we then change our documents on the structure and process? Do we change team roles? Maybe you're more suitable to do the interviews than I am. Okay, let's change that in our scenarios. All of that. So I think that's what you normally forget because you're so excited about the fact that you don't have a crisis anymore.
Yeah, so trained for the work done and ready to get back to normal. So the post-mortem. And I was just thinking, listening you kind of in this made up situation from the planning and in crisis and afterwards, that you basically have kind of two swim lanes. You have the communication aspect of it, and then the actual fixing what caused. So how these intervene, or are these parallel to each other, or are they kind of actually one process in a sense? But how you see that from your point?
No, I think you're correct in describing them as two different processes, but they need to be super closely connected to each other, because sometimes the team fixing what's broken, they might need to fix something because it's needed from a communications perspective, or they need to assess something because it's needed from a communications perspective. That, okay, but listen, we need to fix this first because that's where we have the most pressure from an external perception perspective. So getting that prioritization right, but that needs to be done in the crisis management team.
Yeah.
So you need to have a crisis manager who can take that decision and say, okay, guys, you're trying to fix the broken B, but it's actually the A that you need to focus on. And we need to find more information about C. And that's something you need to work with for half an hour and then come back to the team. What I've also realized when handling these kind of things is that you need to have a circular information flow, because sometimes you have the setup that the experts handling the thing that's broken, they convey information to the communication person communicates it to the world, but then you don't get the feedback. Okay, they understand this, but now they're asking questions about something different. Okay, we need to take that back to the team that's working on what's broken, and we need to make sure that they actually focus on finding out more information, or addressing a question that is super topical outside of the company. So having that circular flow of information, making sure it always comes back to the crisis management team. What we have had historically when I've run teams like that is that we've had someone actually outside of the crisis management room handling media and handling press, basically. So they're not in the room disturbing the whole team, but you have a person in the room who listens in, who gets the latest information, and then conveys that to the person who's just taking calls all of the time. So if it's a really bad crisis, you might have might do 40 interviews in a day or something like that, and then you need to get the latest information, but you can't be disturbed by being in all the discussions in a crisis management team setting. So separating maybe a spokesperson, putting that person in a separate room right next to the crisis management team, making sure that person is fed with information and also feeds back that, now we're getting these kind of questions. What do I say about that? Right, leave it to the crisis management team to get back to you.
Yeah, and also kind of safeguarding that person, that they don't need to, or they are not able to share all those is that A or is that B, is that C kind of
Exactly.
yeah.
And also, we did have at times we've had just an observer in the room as well. So not being part of the crisis management team, but from a communications perspective, just being there observing, maybe noticing that they're saying this, but we're actually saying this externally. There's a delta that we need to close, because otherwise we might end up saying the wrong things or doing the wrong things, whatever. So that might be hard to maybe see sometimes if you're in the middle of it, you're stressed, you're just trying to resolve the situation. But having some external observer who can have a more holistic perspective is quite beneficial at times as well.
Definitely. As we close to the 1 hour mark, a little bit on the wrap up side, what would be the one advice you want our listeners to walk away about crisis communication?
It's gonna be two advices, but first one is getting the structure in place. So have that team with defined roles and a defined process for how to handle both the crisis but also the information flow. And then the second advice then is to practice. So I think those are the two things you can really start doing straight away if you're not doing it already.
So practice makes perfect, and make sure practicing we have the structure in place. And when the crisis hit, it's not probably the best time to practice anything new.
No.
Yeah.
You should do it in peaceful times, probably.
We always end up with a couple rapid questions. If you could get now your marketing and communication budget 3 times, both the money-wise and the FTEs, what would you do? And the only rule is it needs to be sane investment decision or business decision. So how would you use that? 3 times the manpower and money.
Good question. I think I would probably spend a lot of it, at least maybe not all of it, but really continuing to build brand awareness around Saab, because we have a delicate problem, I guess, or it's a blessing and a curse. But we have a well-known brand, but it's known for making cars. Something that we stopped doing 30 years ago, but it still lives on. Highly appreciated. People love the car, they love the brand, but right now we're doing pretty much everything except cars. So building brand awareness around Saab, what we're doing today, our purpose of keeping people and society safe, something I would spend most of that money on, I think, both in a Swedish context but also internationally.
Anything else?
No, I think that's where I would.
That's the main focus. That's the main
exactly.
focus. So positioning in that sense. Another rapid question. What advice or one tip would you give yourself when starting out in your first managerial or leadership position?
I would say, dare to take uncomfortable decisions quickly. Don't wait for things that aren't working. Don't wait for that to settle in and become part of the structure. Try to take those kind of decisions that might be uncomfortable for several reasons, but try to take those decisions as soon as you're confident that this is a problem that needs to be handled. Try to handle it as soon as possible. That would be my one tip.
That's a good tip, because the uncomfort doesn't go away by itself.
No, it rarely does, and after a while, it creates more uncomfortable situations than maybe from the beginning.
Yeah, that's a good tip to share. All right, thank you all our listeners. I bet you get bunch of insights on the world of crisis communications, and thank you, Viktor, for taking the time. And if our listeners want to reach out to you, have a word, or just follow what Saab is doing, what's the best way or channel to follow you?
Yeah, when it comes to me personally, I guess I have the LinkedIn page, so you can find me on LinkedIn for that kind of things. And then when it comes to Saab, we're on all social media, so we have quite a nice flow in social media. So don't miss out on that.
We will definitely have on the show notes your LinkedIn profile as well if our listeners want to connect with you. Thank you, Viktor. Thank you, our listeners, and have a great day.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Morning Brew for Marketing Executives. We hope you found today's episode insightful and inspiring. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe and leave us a review. It helps us bring you more stories from marketing leaders. This podcast is produced by Maven First. For more information, please visit mavenfirst.com.